This is a production of Cornell University.
Yeah, let's get started here. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to the 7th episode this year, the Cornell Turf Show, our 4th week doing this. Been great. Couple of weeks, sunny and warm, getting to talk about people out playing, and then there's snow on the ground here for us in Ithaca. So maybe a couple of you guys joining from indoors this morning. Today's guest, Dr. John Inguagiato of UConn. We're going to do a lot of talking about roots today, and for our live attendees, again, we have a poll question. Just kind of what grass do you guys have on your green, spent, POA, mix, other? So if you got time, fill that poll out. But otherwise, we'll get started. One of our previous guests on the show, Rich Buckley, for those who can see on the screen, we got a nice picture of Rich in the lab. What's he up to there, Frank?
Well, Rich is a busy guy, Carl. Thanks for hosting, and thank you guys all for joining us today, whether it's live via video or we've even made this into a podcast. So for those of you not watching on, News Channel 6 or something, you can't necessarily see the slides here, but Rich is a longtime supporter of all the things we've done to try to help with diagnostics. And of course, I think had a bit of an influence on our guest's career during his time there. So let's just start out with some images, Carl. I sort of scour Twitter weekly looking for things, and projects are wrapping up, whether you're washing ball washers or fixing up ball washers or putting in new bathrooms. People are getting new equipment delivered, and here's a shot of a whole bunch of pumps being pushed into triplex mowers on their way for delivery. Of course, spring is springing and sprung in many areas. And so many golf courses are fortunate to have areas where it makes sense to have these beautiful flowering trees. I know we have them on a lot of the state park golf courses, certainly the ones down at Bethpage that I'm most familiar with. But I thought I'd share, if you're waking up this spring morning like we are in upstate New York with some snow, I'd share some pictures from my friends down under in Australia. I have a lot of close friends that I've developed over the years of visiting there. And here's a shot from an area just the northwest of Sydney. This is a golf course in the lower left taken about a week ago. And this is what it looked like just last week after the flooding went through. They got essentially 3/4 of their annual rainfall in a day. So, if you think you're having a bad day, how about these poor guys, trying to get it done there. So, before I pass it back to you, Carl, for the BMP Minute today, and we go through my little spiel and get to Johnny, let me remind everybody about this very exciting project we've got going on in a partnership with the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute, which is, of course, funded by the New York State DEC. This is based at the Rochester Institute of Technology, much like the New York State IPM program, funded by New York State, is based at Cornell University. And we're partnering with them and our old pal, Rick Slattery, the longtime former superintendent at Locust Hill Golf Club that we did the wash pad with years ago. I just want to remind you, we've been at this for about a little over a year now in earnest. We've collected the data, done a bunch of work trying to improve the adoption of best management practices, essentially west of I-81. And it's culminated recently in a website that's housed at the Pollution Prevention Institute. And again, for those of you watching on News Channel 6, you can see the website here. You have the ability to subscribe and reach out to us. Maybe you have a question about what this is, like to learn a little bit more. I'd encourage you to participate in this. There are some resources that you'll see highlighted there, and one in particular that I will pass it over to Carl to talk about is this wonderful placard that's now been launching and available through Twitter, through the website. You can download, print out copies. We're about to mail out a bunch, Carl. How did we come up with this idea to release this poster and then take us through the minute?
Yes, so we spent most of last year, again, with Rick Slattery's help, just randomly surveying a bunch of golf courses in our region, asking about a bunch of best management practices. And from that data, we learned, okay, maybe we should focus on certain practices that people aren't doing so much, and let's condense the information down into a digestible format And so this is what we came up with, this infographic poster, really simple, short hitting tips. We aimed this to be very easy to look at, not too much text on here, just really quick hitting, easily digestible best management practices. So for those who have been with us on the show for the last couple of weeks, we've been taking certain pieces of this, expanding it out, doing a tip of the day. And so our tip of the day today is irrigation run time. Everybody does this in minutes, right? And that's understandable. You got to program the irrigation system in minutes, but not a whole lot of people from when we're going around talking to people know how that run time in minutes translates to inches. And so it's always been kind of confusing for me. I didn't come from turf, but we look at rainfall and we say, hey, it rained an inch yesterday, or hey, we got a half an inch. But when we talk about irrigation, oh, I ran it for 10 minutes last night. I ran it for 12 minutes. And not everyone that I've seen knows how that minute number translates to inches. So our BMP tip of the day, hey, just kind of get a feel for, hey, how many inches did I put down if I ran a 10-minute cycle last night? That seems like something we should know when we're looking at ET data and evapotranspiration. Again, we're measuring that in inches. If we're replacing that amount of water, we should probably know how many inches we're applying to. So today's BMP tip of the day, throw some catch cups out there. You can even do this with a soil moisture meter. If you run it for 10 minutes, hey, probe before and after and see what % increase you got. So that's our BMP tip of the day.
Thanks, Carl. I turned my camera off. I might be having a little bit of internet trouble, Carl. So keep me honest. If you can't hear me, shout out at me right away. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So before we get to John, our conversation about turfgrass diseases, especially root issues early on, John's got a lot of expertise in a lot of areas here. Let's start with just the weather. In case you were wondering, it's warmer than normal. Even though there's snow on the ground outside, you can see some areas around Buffalo, even on the east end of Long Island, you're looking at 2 weeks ahead of normal. Where John is out there in Stores, Connecticut, 2 weeks ahead of normal, creeping into 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks ahead of normal in and around the Buffalo area as well. So in case, lest anybody wonder that the last couple of cooler days might be what we're having overall, we've been warmer. We've also been persistently dry. Except for where Rich Buckley is on Thursdays. Every place but where Rich Buckley is on Thursdays typically has been dry. This is a look at % normal precipitation, across the region over the last month, not just short of a week. So this is about a week ago. These maps update every Thursday, and they don't update until after we do this webinar. So unfortunately with these things, we're looking at some dry weather. But to clarify, a lot of these things aren't going to change much by the little bit of rainfall that just might have went through recently. Well, one of the things that did go through recently was warmer temperatures and drier conditions. And again, chatting with Rich this morning, he's starting to get some winter damage on annual bluegrass, a little bit on Kentucky bluegrass into the labs as warm temperatures come up. If things start greening up, you can see maybe what's not going to green up, or sometimes POA starts green, but because it gets dry, dies out. Now, again, it's been a little bit wet the last recent week or so, up until just yesterday. You're getting 1-2 inches again into New Jersey is soaking wet. Looks like even where Johnny is, it's pretty wet out in Stores, Connecticut. But in general, everybody had a little bit of rainfall the last week, but that's not going to solve all the problems. What it seemed to do, John, and let me start by chatting with this thing first. This popped up on the radar. Rich said he got a bunch of samples that came in the lab, and I immediately, go to the publication out of Kentucky that Paul Koch and Bruce and everybody's contributed to over the last several years. And I wonder how much you know about this. This is one of those weird new diseases in my mind. When I look at the chemicals, there's a lot of A superscripts there, which means a lot of companies wrote two double E formulations. These are EPA emergency use guidelines that these products will work on this particular disease. And then a lot of the combination products, there's not a lot of data on them. If you look at the efficacy there, this L indicates very limited data. Where we do have good data on a lot of them, but a lot of them are 2EE emergency sorts of things. And John, let me bring you in here for a minute and ask you, what do you think? What do you want to tell me about why Tia Patch controlling it and worrying about it with the current weather conditions?
I mean, it's definitely, I mean, it's a perennial issue. I mean, folks that are managing POA, and it looks like a number of our participants today are POA growers. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be an issue that people deal with pretty frequently in the spring. I mean, one thing I would say about it is, in most cases, it's generally not a devastating disease. I mean, you get some yellow rings, and it's kind of one of those first diseases that we see every spring, and so everyone's fired up about it. Generally, I don't find it terribly, devastating, but it can be problematic because it's a fungus that's working down there in the thatch, and you can get some kind of degradation there in the thatch, and you can kind of get some softness in that ring, which obviously can have an impact on ball roll in some cases, particularly when it's really severe. So, it can be a challenge. Regarding when we see it, it's something that we'll start to see showing up when the turf starts to break dormancy. I noticed it. I mean, you brought it up that Rich is seeing it in the lab down there. I'm seeing it at our field showing up, and you'll see it until temperatures consistently break 75 degrees. We'll see it. We'll see it 75, even 80 degrees. So,
and I think your comment about the one problem many would have with it would be that it causes that pitting, that depression,
yep,
that will disrupt ball roll. I actually think you're right. I'm not sure I've ever seen it be lethal, but I have seen it. Cause those depressions, which are ball roll issues. So listen, I want to get to this next topic because I brought it up with Rich last week. I know this is something you've spent a fair amount of your career working on as well. And that's early season anthracnose. One of the things I've read, especially something I think you got interviewed last year, you called this particular problem, Johnny, a chronic disease, one that you just sort of learn to live with. And I guess in the places where it is chronic, where does early season stuff fit in? What do you usually tell people, why they're seeing it or what's it about, and then how to manage it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the early season stuff, I really link the early season stuff probably to maybe an indication of areas where you kind of have a lot of moisture sitting around in the canopy. Stuff that was probably hanging around in the fall, kind of remained wet in the fall, and kind of, maybe we had some, moderate temperatures over the winter, and it's just kind of moisture hanging around in there, and the fungus is kind of continuing to work away. I mean, in most cases, I'd be curious to hear what people's experiences are, but in most cases, I kind of see the early spring stuff is kind of a transitional. It kind of comes, but it's not the big flare up that we see kind of showing up into June and July. So, I mean, and because it is showing up at that time of year, oftentimes it's early enough where we can get POA to kind of recover and fill back in. So, I think once we kind of start our fungicide programs and just turf starts to grow again, a lot of times we can kind of overcome that kind of early season stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you for making the transition really easy as we start our conversation about, what I know you've been playing around with for a while now. We talked about it last year, probably around a year ago this time. It comes up every spring as it relates to soil temperature and timing of fungicide applications and the kinds of problems we have with root pathogens. Now, what's really interesting is if you look at our 2-inch soil temperatures as modeled and reported on our Turfgrass forecast website, which Art builds for the, pulls from the Northeast Climate Center, we were actually a little bit warmer last week than we are this week. It looks like it's gotten warmer further south more uniformly, but the soils are still in the low 50s, John. And really that's the launching point for me here, because, you know, Rich Buckley likes to remind me that the fungi don't read the textbooks. And so they don't really know what they're, you know, well, it says in the textbook, it does this. But it seems like this is one of those fungi that we really tie to soil temperature activity. Is it something that if I've had a chronic problem with, it's good to get out there early and do this now, maybe while it's drier, for summer patch and fairy ring? Take all, I would have had to treat it maybe best in the fall, but let's start with the ones that I'm timing up for spring applications. Can I be too early?
Yeah, I would say you can certainly be too early. You know, summer patch, for an example, these fungicides only work when the fungus is actually actively growing. So, you know, these fungicides that you apply them, they're going to degrade. And so if you apply them too early, they're going to break down, they're going to degrade, they're going to be metabolized inside the plant. And if that happens before the fungus is actually actively growing and infecting the plant, then you just wasted that application. So certainly, and you know, I think it's great to look at soil temperature maps like you just pulled up there. You know, it's good to monitor those things, but you know, I think that we need to be mindful of, it's not just that blip where soil temperatures all of a sudden shoot up to 65 degrees for a day. That's not biologically that relevant. We need those soil temperatures to kind of stabilize. And so, you know, I encourage people to monitor daily, you know, look at the, you know, those kinds of computer-based things. That's a great way to kind of start knowing when you need to go out there and physically track your own soil temperatures on a daily basis.
That's right. Perfect. And so how much do we know about how long these things will last? Let's start with, first off, we talked about it last week. I've talked about it with other folks. We have a chronic problem with making sure we get enough water in, right? Get enough water on it, the fungicide, to get it down to where they're active. How much do we know about, once it gets there, roughly how long it's protecting us? How many, you know, is it like pre-emergent herbicides, John, where, you know, I get it on early, it wears out, I might have still germination later that I've got to worry about? How much am I, you know, waiting till it gets to that temperature and then knowing I got to do it 3 weeks later, and then 3 weeks later, and 3 weeks later? When can I start thinking about how long these things are going to last?
No weed scientist, but from what I do know, yeah, I think we know about as much about how long a fungicide app lasts as well as we do a pre-emergent herbicide, right? I mean, those guys, it's always like, well, it's a really rainy year this year, so you're going to have to tighten up that, you know. Right. The same thing is true with fungicides. I mean, to answer your question, no, you know, we don't know exactly how long it's going to last. It's dependent on a lot of factors. I would say if we have warm and wet conditions, those things probably aren't going to last as long, because you've got microbial activity breaking down fungicides, you got the plant growing, and so the fungicide gets metabolized and broken down inside the plant, and you've got just degradation through environmental things. So generally speaking, though, I mean, I think that the recommendations of, you know, high rates of these different fungicides on a 21-day interval, 28-day interval maybe, generally provide fairly reliable control. But the challenge comes, you know, I mean, I talked to a number of superintendents, like, well, we applied early, you know, we did it at the right time, and I still get this breakthrough. What's the problem here? And, you know, I think it's these root pathogens are really, really challenging to control. Our fungicides are really, you know, have a really high affinity to bind and get locked up in organic matter in soil. And that's why we need those high rates in order to control or suppress the disease, because we need to put as much of the active ingredient as we can into that soil system for the hope that it's going to get actually to the root. And get taken up by the plant. And if you're using those low rates, you know, the chances are that you're likely going to just get it locked up, and the roots aren't actually going to get it. So it's you got to use the high rates. And you know, the latest research that Jim Kearns at North Carolina State has been finding is, you know, there's always debate about whether I got to water it in or whether I got to use the high carrier volume. And he's putting out some data now that really kind of confirms what we've always taught and believed is that, it is important to get down a good carrier volume or to water it in with, an eighth of an inch or.
One of the things I always think about whenever we're trying to solve soil problems is that you're never going to get like eradication of this organism. There's always going to be some level of infection you're going to live with. Even with a good high rate drench, there are likely to be escapes either because of intervals or population levels that simply, can't be managed. And again, those things are sort of consistent. The same conditions that cause the breakdown of the fungicide enhance the infection and populations oftentimes of these root pathogens. And so it brings up the question that you've studied, which is, how do you deal with the sort of ancillary stress that somewhat determines how much root loss I can live with, right? And I think you identified, over the years, we've talked about the aerification and the manganese applications in particular. But when people come back to you and say, I think I did everything right, and it's still not working, they feel like they're at the high rate. Are they saying that they're also fixing these root problems? These sort of other aspects, and they're still having this problem? Or is that one of those things that's a lingering issue that they just sort of, no matter what they do, they're just going to have summer patch?
I think that some of those things are harder to address. It's easier to change your chemical program quickly. It's harder to remediate longstanding soil issues. So, I think it takes time. And I think if you can, get your root, if you can really maximize root health through good cultivation practices, through making sure that that your manganese levels are sufficient. I think that in the long term, I think that those things are going to help. I think it's just harder to see those things take an immediate impact, probably.
Well, and a lot of times, I think about, especially, high-end guys, high-end golf courses with bent POA fairways and nice lush Kentucky bluegrass, maybe some POA annua rough that they're keeping nice. Right now it's going to get going soon. It'll get going. I worry sometimes about the taller grass, the fairways and the rough areas. John, those soil issues they're larger. It's not like you're just trying to fix putting green stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about these larger soil areas. What about Kentucky bluegrass? Have we made enough headway with resistance in some of the bluegrass types that really should be your first line of defense?
There's definitely been progress there. I don't, there are, there's a number of cultivars, and, one that has been kind of studied for the past several years is like Barvet, has shown some pretty good summer patch tolerance. But I was just looking at the latest NTEP trial work, and it looks like there's some additional ones. So Barvet still continues to be good, but there's some additional ones, and unfortunately the names are slipping me right now. Yeah. But there has been some progress there, and I'm encouraged by that, because I came from Rutgers. I could appreciate some good genetics. It makes everything easier. Should it be our first thing? I don't know that it's the resistance level is that strong yet to where it's like put it to bed kind of an issue. It's not like smut
right, okay.
in Kentucky bluegrass, right? We don't talk about smut anymore, but for summer patch, it's not quite that great, but it's definitely a big improvement. And I think that when you have the opportunity, if you have a perennial historical problem with that disease, you should really be trying to take advantage when you have those opportunities to use new seed to look at resistant ones.
Okay. And so one thing that doesn't seem to have any resistance issues where we have any resistance to it is Pythium root rot. It seems to rear its head every year when rainfall levels get really high. Of course, we're dry now, but I was alarmed to see promotional emails coming through my email box recently from suppliers throughout the region who will remain nameless, so I don't get letters sent to the lawyers at Cornell, who are promoting preventative Pythium root rot applications. And listen, I don't know a lot about, I don't know a lot about a lot, especially when it comes to these sorts of things. But when it comes to Pythium, that seems a little bit of a stretch to be worrying about having to make preventative Pythium root rot applications in the next couple of weeks. What say you, John?
I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think that I see a big push for similar types of programs every spring. And, I'm not going to say that everyone's wasting their time with them. But I think to just assume that everybody needs to do this. I mean, it's a situation where if you have a history of Pythium root rot, and like you've gotten lab tests and you get those results back, and it's like the same wet areas every year where you get it, and you get them in the spring or you get them in early summer showing up, then yeah, those for those folks, I think that treating preventatively probably is something you ought to be considering.
Well, or maybe fixing the drainage. What do you think?
Well,
John?
yeah,
I mean, can we?
Yeah, of course, yeah. But a couple of things. I mean, before we even, I agree with you 100% on that. But I think an important thing to remember is that, it's not like it's not like take all patch or summer patch where you've got one single pathogen out there. When it comes to Pythium root rots, there's a lot of different Pythium species. Some are cool weather grower, infecting Pythiums. Others are warm weather types of pathogens. And so to say that you need to, go out, even if you get soil, diagnostic lab test saying that you've got a Pythium root rot, you got to think about, when did you see that? Did you see it in the middle of the summer, or did you see it like towards the end? Because in some cases, maybe the optimal preventive timing is in the summer months, not right now. Just like we were talking about before, you can be too early.
So where does our use of phosphites come into this discussion? Because obviously they come up a little bit as a treatment that a lot of guys are on. And I know John Kaminsky a number of years ago was rambling around finding Pythiums that phosphites didn't control. Do we have any of that going on with the variety of Pythium species we have in the root zones, ones that might simply not be affected very much by phosphite? Are we potentially selecting for that particular Pythium with the way we use phosphites nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, there's John actually is continuing to kind of do some of that work, and it does appear to be the case. There do seem to be, through the very consistent use of phosphites or signature type products. It does seem that we are perhaps selecting for, because those products are pretty broad spectrum Pythium materials. Mm-hmm. It seems that there are some weaker Pythiums. Because I said there's a lot of species. So there's some weaker ones out there that might not be as sensitive to those. And so through the continued use, we're selecting for those weaker ones. And it does seem to cause, kind of a low canopy level blight. And it typically, it shows up during the summer months. But fortunately, what John has seen and what others have seen is that it is pretty easy to check up. So, they seem to be very sensitive to some of our traditional Pythium products like Segway or Banol. Mm-hmm. And so, just kind of one or two applications of one of those products, if that's what you're dealing with, does seem to make a difference.
Perfect. Carl, we're getting close, brother. Any questions for us before we thank John and sign off?
Yeah, no questions from the group, but I did have a comment, John. A couple of weeks ago, again, we were talking about these drench applications, and Jason Griffiths asked a good question. Can I throw a wetting agent in there, or can I just poke a hole and maybe that allows me to get some more of that application down into the root zone easier? Any comments on maybe one of those two methods, getting it down there easier?
Yeah, I mean, I think we might have even talked about that last year when we were talking about summer patch, but I haven't seen I haven't seen really great data on that yet, but I am a firm believer that, kind of preloading your soil system with a wetting agent is probably really important to ensuring that you get good fungicide movement down. We've all seen those pictures, like with the fingered flow. So, if you have fingered flow, of water movement through your soil profile, well, that's where your fungicide's going. And so if you've got, preferential movement, then you're potentially not protecting all of your roots. And so by getting a wetting agent in there and uniformly wetting that profile, you're hopefully going to get more uniform fungicide coverage.
Perfect. Thanks for the comment, Carl. John, thanks for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate you doing this again, and best to Michelle and the kids. Carl, another fast 30 minutes in the books, brother.
Yep, another one in the books. And a quick announcement. For those who are familiar, last year there was a documentary. I think it's the Barstool Golf guys did it with the Wingfoot, Steve Rabideau behind the scenes for the U.S. Open. And they're actually releasing another one tonight. I think it's at 8:00, but I did see some in their trailer, some images of National Golf Links in there. So for you guys who are really interested in maybe a behind the scenes look of some really high level golf course management, you might want to check that out tonight. But yeah. Other than that, we'll get everybody out of here. John, thank you again for your time. As always, it's been the Cornell Turf Show. Fastest 30 minutes in turf. See you guys next week.
All right, good time. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good season.
Good luck.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.